Hey, this is Steve. I'm at the Homestead Fair down near Waco, Texas, and we just got down here and we're checking it out. There's all kinds of really neat things to see. There's the barn raising, there's lots of crafts, lots of different things that you can do, including blacksmithing items, weaving, knitting, sheep herding. And you can see all these things happening here in real time. There's a whole lot of things to do down here, but I'll let you see what we got going here with the rest of this video, and we'll check back in with you a little bit later.
Stick right there?
Oh.
The stick, the square edges of that stick is bumping the cradle and it's rocking the cradle. So the stick is called the damsel. Now, the damsel gets worn out over the years as a wooden dowel. That is a damsel in distress. Right there is where the grain falls into the center or the eye of the stone. Now, it goes down past the bell, right? That's the thing that's holding the stone onto the shaft. It goes past the bell. And those grain berries hit the bedstone and can go no farther. So they immediately fill up the grooves, which are deeper around the eye of the stone. That process is called blossoming. Blossoming sounds like blossoming, and blossom in French is clouer. So for all the word detectives, now we have a clue why we're calling it flour, not milkweed powder. What goes in is the wheat berries. What comes into the track is the flour. You can feel how fine the flour is. There's a little white dish there. Please feel free to employ the rule of thumb and feel between your thumb and forefinger how fine a flour a 200-year-old millstone can produce. So from the track, I have two sweeps, so you can see going round and round. Helps it over to the side I'm standing, where there is a chute, and it goes down into a bucket that's hanging on the chute. From there, it's off to the pantry. There's just a couple of things that's interesting to know. We're talking about this. You're really going back to 1776. You know, there was a famous battle that took place in Trenton. It was one of the few victories that we had. It was on Christmas Eve that actually the painting is on some artistic license. In reality, you wouldn't have seen anybody because that crossing of the Delaware on Christmas Eve was at night during a storm. But Captain Mudd, with the assistance of his other guides, helped Washington's Continental armies recross from eastern Pennsylvania into New Jersey, and then they marched south to Trenton. And Christmas Day, the German Hessian forces woke up and had what we call a very bad day. They were celebrating the birth of Christ, nursing their hangovers, and two Continental armies in battle formation. So with that victory, just so you know, the owner of this mill was there, Captain Mudd. There was a couple of engineering issues that had to be overcome. One of them is, as you see the vertical shaft going through the stanchion and the bedstone, notice that that shaft is spinning straight and true. And for those engineering-minded folks in the audience, how can we do that? Because ball bearings and bushings have not been invented for over 100 years. Well, what they discovered is, or learned, or passed on, is this. There's a corn cob. Soak this in oil, and that acts as a sponge and absorbs the oil. If this were the hole, then this were the shaft, not the scale, that this is sitting on. There are, in our case, 7 oil-soaked corn cobs acting as bearings. The oil on the cob keeps that shaft lubricated for up to 6 months. Every 6 months, we'll reapply the oil to it. Some of the cobs we think that some of the cobs might be 100 years old. So you get a lot of money's worth of engineering genius from corn cob. If you do have a problem with the front end of your Toyota Corolla, I advise go see your local farmer, and maybe he'll do a much better job at a lower price than the Toyota dealership. In any case, that's one. The other, did I mention the teeth on the gear made out of wood? So, in their spare time, and they did have spare time, don't believe everything that's taught in public school, they would whittle out things like this. And that's the tooth that's on the gear in the back that's driving this whole mill stone. A lot of the teeth are made out of wood. So if you did break a tooth, if you break a tooth, go see your miller. We can actually help you.
I'll get you a woodman.
So mills like this were in every community had a mill. This was the epicenter of social and economic activity. People would bring their stuff to the mill because there was sufficient power to work your stuff. Whether it's be milling grain, or milling barley, or milling rye, or maybe with the line shaft, we're going to do leather work, fiber craft, pottery, iron work. You put a belt on a wheel, and now you have a power tool. So people would bring their stuff to the mill. I'm not on the homestead today. I'm at the mill. I'm milling around. So that's a phrase that we use often. I'm milling around. Now, one other thing to let you know is that the millstone that you see here is working for a living. It's the last fully operational water-driven mill in the state of Texas. But it's an old stone at 200 years old. When it was a younger stone, it was spinning much faster. We're spinning at about 25 RPM, making great flour. When it was a younger stone, it probably spun no less than 250 RPM.
Wow.
At that RPM, it would produce a lot more volume, but it was also kicking up a lot of flour dust. If you don't know, flour burns very well. I had some young lady say to me, well, if you have a kitchen fire, throw some flour on it. I said, if you do that, don't bother calling the fire department because your house is going to explode. Flour is a hydrocarbon, so is gasoline. So the dust is also highly explosive. Now, if this was spinning at 250 RPM, what they would have done from the furniture would be that piece of mill furniture, which is a cowling, which actually would contain it, which means we can't see what's going on. And remember, they don't have clear plastic tubes. So if the miller was distracted and we ran out of grain, and we could have a stone striking a stone at a high RPM, we could get a spark, and that could cause some trouble. So the miller would use another sense, and that would be his nose, because flour gives off a very distinctive burning smell before it explodes and goes up in flames. That's the phrase, keep your nose to the grindstone. Kind of a generic pay attention to whatever you're doing, but back then it was a very specific purpose. Now this is about 1850. The Industrial Revolution is the next revolution. Mills like this would survive the American Revolution, but the Industrial Revolution, they would not. So the whole fabric of America began to change, going to a factory system. There was competition and consolidation. Mills like this, cottage industries began to disappear as families were moving more into the industrial factories. Also, community-based industries could not compete, so they would begin to close down. So mills like this would shut down by the hundreds every year. So here we are. The nation is much larger than it was back in colonial times, but we only have maybe a few hundred left mills that are still standing, and even fewer that are fully operational. This mill last produced commercially in 1911 in New Jersey. Probably was not going very well for some time, but it closed down, and then basically was a neat place to hang out and get away from the city as the vines began to go over the road. So we got to, we feel, just in time to bring it back to life, restore it to its original size, dimension, and to bring a millstone in here and put it back to work. We have 300,000 people who come to our craft mills to be able to see it. I hope you're having a great day. Thank you for milling around. Keep your nose to the grindstone. Try to take it as much as you can. And if you're interested in any of the products that this millstone produces, this flour is used exclusively in our butterscotch and blue corn pancake mix. If you haven't tried that, it is the bomb. It's over the top. The other thing is we do sell the flour. It's called French Burr Whole White and French Burr Whole Red, which means it was milled on this specific stone. So it becomes a nifty souvenir. You can buy it. It's edible, but please keep it as a souvenir on the shelf of a mantle for the next 50 years. Hand it down to your grandchildren. actually we can resupply you. So feel free to use it. It's actually very fine flour and it does a better job, I think, when I get this trimmed just right. It mills a whole white flour, actually finer than our other mills that we sip. So you can explore that if you'd like to. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Good morning. How's everyone doing? Thank y'all for coming out. Well, as you can see, we started this barn raising yesterday. We raised 2 vents yesterday, and we hope to raise 2 more today if we get enough people. But we might just start with a bit of a history on American timber framing if y'all are interested in that. As you can see, we have a lot of the traditional tools here laid out. I may tell a few stories about some of the barns that are here and as well as the tools that we used to build them. The grist mill here behind us, this was the John Mott grist mill. It was built in New York in 1725. It was used to grind grain for the Continental Army, for George Washington's army. And also the owner of the mill, John Mott, personally knew George Washington. And the picture, the painting rather, that we've all probably seen in history class of George Washington crossing the Delaware River in the middle of the night, the guide in the front of his boat was John Mott. He owned that mill. So we're very fortunate to have been able to procure that grain down here, and it's been grinding grain in its current location for 21 years. So we hope it'll last another 200 or 300. The barn over here behind you, or in front of you, depending on which way you're standing, the gray one with the red trim, that is about a 1740s barn from in New York as well. There's something interesting about that barn, very to find an American timber frame. And if you go in there, you'll see these braces that go from the wall post up to what's called the connecting tie. These are all straight. In that barn, they're crooked. They're big, long arches. And you might say, oh, well, this timber framer just liked arches. Well, no, he was actually a German timber framer. So in Germany, really Europe, for the most part, was deforested by the late 1600s, early 1700s, and so they had begun to develop timber framing techniques that would incorporate crooked branches of trees for the smaller members, such as braces, and they would end up shaping them to be architecturally pleasing as well. So that's a German timber framer. He came to the new colonies in the Americas, and he had beautiful forests of chestnut, hemlock, white oak, but because it was kind of a nod to the fatherland, he went ahead and put crooked braces in there. So that's very, very German, very unique. Also, this barn has something called Roman numerals. That would get a little bit more into the development of timber framing. So at these joints in that barn, you'll see Roman numerals. You'll see an I and an I, and then you'll see 2 I's here, then a V and an I. And they would have gone through and they would have marked every single joint with Roman numerals. Some timber framers developed a whole series of symbols, a whole nomenclature. They'd have different symbols at each joint in the entire barn. Each joint was fit perfectly to that joint, would not fit anywhere else in the barn. Something happened about 100 years later. It was when Eli Whitney, everyone knows he invented the cotton gin, right? So he did something else that he's less famous for, but was very revolutionary, and that was he was given a contract with the American federal government to make 10,000 rifles. Up until that time, every single rifle that had ever been built was completely custom and one of a kind. Every screw, lock, stock, barrel, everything was custom fit for the owner. Otherwise, it was resold, of course, as it was built. Well, Eli says, I'm going to make 10,000 rifles that are exactly the same. And we're all like, well, of course, that's the assembly line. That's modern manufacturing. Well, that was a very revolutionary idea. So Eli Whitney goes, I think it was 1804, 1807. Someone can fact check me on that. And he makes 10,000 exactly similar rifles, and that very quickly began to be picked up by every other discipline in the trades, in nail manufacturing, in sawmilling and things. So within 10 years after Eli Whitney does 10,000 similar rifles, what do we see in timber framing? The first barns that have interchangeable parts we found from 1820. So in all barns previous to that, each one of these braces, even though to you and I they look the same, they were all cut individually, had slightly different angles, slightly different measurements, and they only fit in one place in the barn. By 1820, all those braces are cut exactly the same, and all the mortises are cut exactly the same. Then by 1830 or 40, all the girts are being cut the same. Then you start seeing the advent of larger sawmills. You see the hand hewing that's here on this timber. That becomes less and less common, and you see larger and larger timbers in the barn being sawn at the mill. So you kind of have this phase between like 1810 and 1850 where you'll see little pieces like braces and rafters that were sawn because they had little, farmstead sawmills. As the roads get better, as the railway starts being used, as larger machinery is available, they start hauling larger and larger timber out of the forest down to the sawmills and then building their barns. So really by the Civil War, there's very few hand-hewn barns that were built after the Civil War. They're all sawn. Something that's interesting also about early American timber frames, many of them were built out of hemlock. That's what you see this beam is from. You can see all the original hewing marks in that. That was the only way to make timber up until the sawmill was readily available. And I'll have Levi grab this axe. This is called a broad axe. And so a colonist would go into the forest with a felling axe, which is sitting there beside him. They would fell the tree, one chip at a time. They'd fell the tree. Then they would take the broad axe. They'd pop a line with a chalk line. Many of you will probably have a chalk line in your garage if you're a carpenter. And they would snap a line down this raw log, and they would, with hundreds and hundreds of cuts, they would hew a straight edge all the way down one side, roll it, cut it again 4 times to have a straight beam. We've taken down barns that have beams that are over 60 feet long that are perfectly straight, 300 years old. They were hewn in the forest with just that tool. Then if it was, if you had more of a refined taste, if you wanted to make a home, for example, you take this chisel called a slick, and they would go down the beam one stroke at a time and smooth off all the chunks from the adze and from the broad axe. And then if you want to get real particular, you take a wooden plane like such, and you plane every single beam by hand. World's first cordless power planer. And you smooth it all down. The barn right behind that gray barn was a Dutch home. And if you go in there, the overhead timbers, they're also quite low. Everyone says that people were a lot shorter in the 1700s. Well, I've taken down enough old buildings and banged my heads on doorways to prove that that's true. So very low ceiling. But there's these beautiful little routed edges on every single beam that was done with a hand plane with a molding on it. And they would have routed every beam, and that would have been their dining room. So the hemlock that most of the barns that we take down up in New York are from, those were originally felled for their tannic acid in the bark. So all the people come over here, then they start trapping, they start hunting, and they start exporting furs. So there's this massive booming fur trade that's happening in the new colonies, and they need to tan the hides. So they find out that there's a high content of tannic acid in hemlock bark. So they would actually fell the hemlock trees in the forest. They'd take I wish we had one here, but it almost looks like a crowbar, great bar, and they would peel the bark off of the tree and roll it, peel these massive sheets of hemlock bark, put it on ox carts, drag it down to the city or to the tannery, and they would tan hides, and they would leave the hemlock in the forest. So many of the barns that we've taken down were actually harvested for their bark, and then the farmers would come and harvest the timber to build their barns as they're trying to shell in for their cattle and for their families in those early American harsh winters. Something else that's interesting we've learned is that Art, does anyone know what was on the Mayflower when it returned in 1621? It was timber. The most valuable export from the American colonies was timber for the masts of the Royal Navy. They would make masts as tall as 90 feet out of one tree for the Royal Navy and ship them back. They did that for many decades. So it was really a treasure trove for the timber framers coming here. We have Scotch Irish barns, we have Dutch barns, we have English barns. Each of them had a very distinct way of timber framing. And now when we take them down, we know who they were. And we've taken down about 520 barns in back east over the last 25 years. And we've taken down so many that we've begun to realize each set of carvings and nomenclature and symbols that different timber framers use. We've been able to recognize areas where an itinerant timber framer may have built 10 or 20 or 30 barns, as he would come and do all the joinery for the farmer because it was a specialized trade. That being said, I wanted to show you a couple more tools and then we'll get hands-on with the barn raising. But this looks like a compass, and it certainly could be used for that, but it's also a pencil on it, but in timber framing it would have been called a divider. And something that they did, you have a tape here? Something they didn't have in the early American colonies was flexible steel tape measures. So they would have used something called a divider. Again, looks like a compass. They would have started at one end, set it to 1 foot, and they would have simply walked it down the beam to where they got all the way across the barn until they had their 30 feet or their 32 or their 34. Interestingly enough, almost every single barn we've taken down is exactly on a 1 foot rule. You won't find a 32.7 by 42.1. They'll always be 30 by 40. Well, they had a very simple system of measurement. So they would have laid down the beam. They would have come with their framing square. Any of you who are carpenters, you think, oh, that's just a modern framing square, right? Well, it's actually had its origins in timber framing. Ever wondered why one leg is 1.5 inches and one leg is 2 inch? It was because smaller barns were set on a 1.5 inch rule. Larger barns were set on a 2 inch rule. So 2 inch shoulder, 2 inch mortise. They would lay everything out like that. They would have an awl. They would have scribed their lines across it. Then they would have taken a cordless drill, which was an auger with a wooden stick across it, and they would have put their apprentice there and said, "Hurry up, buddy." And he would have sat down there and drilled holes for the next 2 weeks. And then the master joiner would come back, trim up all the edges, and they'd have a corner chisel and a straight chisel. They'd chisel them all out. Then they drill. Once the joint was fit, then they drill their trunnels, which are tree nails. That's a German word for tree nail. Each of these would have been handmade with a draw knife on a shaving horse in a cold winter evening in the barn somewhere. We packed these out and reused them. They're over 300 years old, extremely strong. And they would fit all the pegs. And then it would be time to raise the barn. And that's when today happens. That's when friends and family show up from all around the valley, and they would all get hands on. They'd raise a barn in one day. The other thing that you'd want to do before getting your barn raised up is get your shingles ready for your roof. We'll just show that real quick, and then we'll get hands on and raise the barn. So you would go find, that one has a knot. You might be better articulating than this one.
We're about to put the barn up.
So you would take what's called a billet. It's about an 18-inch long chunk of a cedar log. Cedar has very straight grain. It's also very weather and bug resistant. And they would take that wood. The steel tool is a froe. The wooden tool is called a mallet, and they would rock it to and fro and break the shingle off. That's where that term comes from, to and fro. And 10,000 shingles later, they'd have a roof. So they would have split all their sheets off by hand, have those stockpiled. They'd have the itinerant joiner come by, do all the timber framing joints, and then they'd have friends and family who would raise the barn, get the roof on, get it sided in before winter. So do we have any volunteers? Do we want to get another vent up today? Think we can do this?
Yes.
All right. Let's start with guys getting shoulder to shoulder right here on this main beam facing the vents that are already in the air. So let's get lined up right here, shoulder to shoulder, as many guys as we can fit. We're going to find out who of y'all had breakfast. Don't make me call your name. We're going to need at least 10 more. Any more volunteers? Tim. If you have a black felt hat on, you're in. Or brown. All right, so now we're going to need another 10 volunteers to get on these pikes right behind them. They have very sharp points on them. Please carefully drag them backwards and then stand them up in the air. A whole row of pikes here behind them. So what we're going to do is these guys on the front, y'all are going to lift up to your waist. We're going to see how it feels. We'll set it back down. Once we're all in position, you're gonna go to your waist, then you'll go up to your shoulders. When you go up overhead, the pikes will come in from behind you. Firmly set the pikes, be very careful, watch their hands. They're also gonna keep you all from running, okay? So once they get up there, you set your pikes, and then y'all gonna keep bringing it up. Once it approaches vertical, we're gonna slow down. We're gonna need to fit this joint and that joint to these girt mortises here. So we need to be real gentle. We don't wanna put too much pressure until those are lined up. We'll beat the joint together with a big mallet. We'll trunnel it, and then it'll be free, but we're not gonna go anywhere until it's steady. We'll also have these ropes keeping it from falling back this way. If we could get a couple more volunteers on this rope over here and a couple more on that end, you'll just be stabilizing as it gets in the air. It's pretty easy. Do you have 2 more guys over here that want to grab these ropes? We just want to keep it from falling back too far. Looks like we got someone running in. All right, just hold on the rope back there by the coil, and as it approaches vertical, you just want to hold it back, keep it from tipping over. All right, let's get hands on. Let's go up to our waist and see how we feel. On count of 3, we're gonna do this together. 1, 2, 3, up to your waist. How do you feel? Good? Okay, go back down. Watch your fingers. Y'all made that look easy. Makes me want to ride this bent up. I've done it, it's fun. This one's not tall enough though. Okay, so everyone ready? Pikes are ready? We got 2, 4, 6, yeah, we got enough. Okay, Travis, you're on that post. Levi, you're gonna hold this one. Mallet, do we have the trunnels for the girt? Okay, perfect. All right, we're ready. Okay, it's gonna be one fluid motion, up to the waist, up to the shoulder, overhead, pikes in. We're gonna go up. It should take about 15 seconds. All right, hands on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, up to your waist, over your shoulder. 3, pikes come in. Watch your fingers, watch their fingers, set the pikes. All right, push it up, nice and easy. Okay, I'm gonna come up here and okay, hold the pressure right there. This one's it. Trunnel and mallet. Okay, let's get the commander over there. Okay, pikes, hold it. We're just gonna get this last joint fit. Bump it over.
I think that's pretty much way.
This beam here has a bit of a twist in it, so it's not quite lining up. But it's going in now. Yeah, pull that as much as you can without twisting off. I can get this in just a second. There's a reason they use a big mallet. Some of these timbers can be stubborn. That mallet is called the commander. You definitely don't want to get in a fight with it. All right, go ahead and draw bore it. Get that nice and tight. All right, we can let the pikes off. Let's give these guys a hand. Y'all did great. Well, hopefully y'all enjoyed that. Thank you for coming out. Feel free to ask any questions. We'll do another one at 1:30. Enjoy the rest of your day.